Welcome back to Trending in Education. Dan Straver, Mike Palmer with you. We are joined by guest Melissa Griffith. Melissa, how are you doing?
I am doing great. Friday afternoon, love it.
Fantastic. We're going to talk about digital literacies on today's podcast and so much more. Fluency, literacy, about the digital world and how to bridge and grow from there. Mike, as always, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm trying to understand how to use the technology around me critically. I was able to power up my computer. I am connected to the internet, and my microphone appears to be working. So I'm at least hitting some base level digital literacy just to get this thing up.
Digital or technology literacy, Mike?
It's all part of the broader penumbra of there's a number of digital literacies under the umbrella of digital literacy. We'll get into that in some depth, Melissa, but
thanks for the clarification.
Your active engagement is also signaling your digital literacy. So yeah. Well done. I defer back to you, Daniel.
Now, Mike, in the past, we have talked about digital literacy amongst older generations and how people can work to become more literate when it comes to digital use and how we can help educate both school-age children and maybe seniors or everybody in between on getting more up to speed on digital literacy. What about the topic of digital literacies speaks to you, and how does this become a much broader topic that we can take a deeper dive on today?
Yeah, good question. So there's this gentleman from the UK named Doug Belshaw, who I saw speak at a conference. There was a conference about the future of higher education called the Ithaka conference in New York that I attended a couple weeks ago. I think we might try to do a summary of that show, of that conference as a follow-up show. But Doug spoke there, and he talked about digital literacies, and I thought it was a pretty interesting level deeper to kind of unpack what do we mean when we talk about digital literacy. There's also an emerging term of art called digital fluency, and interestingly, he likes to think of it as digital literacies, plural, and that they're all about context, and that power is also an important dynamic. So I think those were kind of next level ideas. And then he outlined 8 different 4 mindsets and 4 skill sets that are relevant to engaging with sort of the digital universe in contemporary times. I kind of liken it to Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences. The idea that maybe you're better at music than you are at dance and movement. Not everybody's as gifted across those things as me, for example. But that was a joke. I was dancing.
Sorry, I was laughing on the inside.
No, I know you were being entertained.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I think it's kind of like that, where like rather than think it's a binary, like either I'm digitally literate or I'm not. It's more like there's multiple modes of being conversant, fluent, literate in digital formats, and he went into all of that with some depth. And he also does talk about the idea of surveillance capitalism, which I hadn't really heard before, but that's sort of the idea that the business models of big companies like Facebook, Google, and the like are built on sort of a constant monitoring of digital behavior, and that many of us are operating unaware of that. So I think a lot of the sort of literacies that he's talking about are kind of getting more fully aware of the context in which you're engaging with the internet and with digital tools. So I thought it was pretty interesting because we have talked to Melissa in particular about some of the data privacy concerns, and data privacy, data literacy, I think are in some ways 2 sides of the same coin. So yeah, Melissa, you look like you were ready to jump in there.
No, I actually had more of a question for you because you were the one who turned me on to Doug. I'm curious because you mentioned it a little bit, but it would be good to hear you expand on like digital literacy as power. Like what does that actually mean for us who are not as well versed?
Yeah, it's a great question, and obviously this is sort of like a shout out to Doug Belshaw. He'd be a great guest for us to get as maybe a follow up to this show, because I think his ideas are pretty interesting and kind of surprising at times. But I think it's the context in which you're engaging through digital. Frequently, that context is designed with power dynamics, with profit dynamics. Generally, a lot of the digital experiences that are designed by for-profit companies, and then the user doesn't consume them in that context. The user is sort of blind, like absently consuming it. There's no sense of like critical awareness of the fact that they're being tracked, or the fact that but through use of things like cookies while you're searching or while you're engaging with social, your feed is actually going to be different than mine because our cookies are different. Even if we just go to Google or a browser and search for the exact same thing, it can create what's called a filter bubble, which is like you're basically fed back the type of stuff that you're interested in, and that can sort of reinforce a lot of the social polarization and isolation that's happening in modern life.
So let me see if I understand it, because I actually think it's an interesting point, right? So is it in the case of like, so I'm a avid now YouTube video watcher,
Mm-hmm.
and so I will watch. Let's say I watch Stephen Covey video. That YouTube tends to feed me then Stephen Covey. It will feed me like Seth Meyers. It'll feed me like Trevor Noah. Is that the extent? Because one of the things I found interesting is that when that happens, right, I imagine there's a counter dynamic that happens on the other side, where like if I was to look at a video that was Breitbart in nature, it will start to fit that. Is that what it's saying? It's where like someone like YouTube or a Google or a Facebook, they control the narrative for profitability purposes. Like their belief is that they're going to keep me engaged as long as they can keep me engaged.
Yes.
Right. Is that the extent of it?
Yes. And like one of the slides, he talks about, there's a quote, I'll dig it up in a second, but it's like paraphrasing, like the greatest minds of my generation are figuring out how to get people to click on ads.
Slide 26. Yeah.
Yeah. Who said that, Dan?
Jeff Hammerbacher.
Yeah. So
early Facebook employee.
Yeah, so I think the hotter take, because like we're trying to get into like the 10-year time horizon forecast in addition to the 1 year. So like where we be not just the end of 2020, but where will we be by 2030? The interesting take that I think I got from his presentation is he was also saying that he thought the surveillance capitalism as a business model would not be as strong at the end of the next decade as it is today. So like he was basically signaling, I think, that the many of these platforms are experiencing a crisis of trust that we've talked about. It's hard to figure out what's true on those platforms, and as that continues to eat away at the public trust, he seemed, and again, I think he's almost advocating for new sort of open source browsers to replace Google, and sort of like Mastodon was one that he talked about as like a browser that you could, DuckDuckGoose is another one. But rather than just going to the default, like dominant platforms, understand the context in which those platforms are beneficial to you, and then understand that there are other platforms that give you, like more control over your own data. I don't know whether he's right. I think the monopolies that exist today are pretty deeply entrenched in our global economy. So like, I'm not sure how the next 10 years will go, but I thought it was a provocative take. And then regardless, he's saying like, view source when you're browsing, think about your cookies, think about when you want to go incognito versus not just because you're doing something you shouldn't be doing. It's also just because your data, your privacy is your own. Last point I would say is like a lot of people are saying privacy is gone, so like the notion of privacy when you're in a digital format is almost dated now. So I think that is I'd almost want to hear his reaction to that, but I just thought they were pretty provocative ideas. And then I thought we could probably spend a little time just talking about the different, like the 8 or so competencies that he outlined. And then the other part just around power, Melissa, I know I said I was going to stop, so apologies. But there's the George Orwell quote, you know, he who controls the past controls the present, and he who controls the present controls the future. So I think the idea is that, like, by virtue of the power dynamics
the past
in these
controls
contexts, you get a little bit Orwellian, and you can actually sort of control the way we think about what it means to be digital. So I think she's trying to provide a counter framework. So I thought there were interesting ideas in there.
It is an interesting it's an interesting time we live in, and it's an interesting take on it. Like, I don't like, so I take some argument with some of his positions, at least as you express them. Like, I'm on the side of, I think privacy is gone. I think it has left a while ago. I think you can do things to protect yourselves, but even something like going incognito mode on Google only stops
so much. Yep.
Only stops your computer from tracking it. It does not stop everyone else from tracking you. So it's a false sense of security, right, in my mind to go incognito, because hackers aren't coming into my house to look at my computer screen. That stops my husband or my significant other from being able to tell what I've done. Nothing else.
Yeah.
So I take some premise in that, and to go to, and we've had this conversation on the call before, to go to a world where I step away from Google is a scary world for me, because Google provides so much value. So I don't think that's the answer. So what I'm interested in, because when you talk about digital literacy, and especially on this call, it goes back to education in my mind, and always to education. And like, I need to be aware, in particularly in this time of fake news and of the way, because I get caught up in it, right? So I am fed stuff that I want to see.
Right.
And so I get entrenched in my belief that the world thinks like me. And I think there's a version of this, not to get with the show political, but there's a version of this that just happened in the UK again, in the elections that happened, where like you get caught up in your own world, and then you realize that, like, yeah, the rest of the world does not think like you.
So Melissa, wouldn't that speak though to getting outside of Google? Like, wouldn't that speak to using a DuckDuckGo or using Google without your cookies enabled, so that your feedback loop isn't just your own?
No, because because I think I'm a capitalist at its core, and I will say this: follow this trend, follow this trend for a little while, right? If you show me a system that you think it's better than Google, I will show you a system that I will corrupt when it becomes popular. Like, I will learn to game any system, and like I believe my dad always used to say this: power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So if a new system took over, we will figure out a way to corrupt it. So the thing that I think is uncorruptible is my mind. And so I think in a world where I've recognized that Google is searching and showing me this, I can easily, because it is still a computer in a sense, I can easily type in some other statement into my search browser that allows me to see the other side, and then follow Google down that path of it. And I do it from time to time, because it is a way to see how the world thinks, and that's the only way I actually believe you can get out of the mind game that these browsers put you in,
right,
while not losing the value that it provides. So
yeah, and I think that gets back to the idea of informed consent, and like, you know, knowing what you're signing off on. You know, what are the terms and conditions, and how much is the platform protecting its consumers, its members' data. And I think there is going to be something interesting should emerge in the next 10 years if you are looking at that long a time horizon, particularly around technology, like decentralized technologies like the blockchain. Like, that's where I would imagine more splintering of how people are engaging through digital platforms around things like search, like where like at least an informed, like, you know, digerati will know how to navigate Google in the way that you're describing. And then when they want to search in a way that Google wouldn't understand. They would go to another browser. And then increasingly, I think the argument is that that movement towards decentralization is sort of a natural, it's like an inevitable aspect of technical advancement, is that those forms are going to get more decentralized, and then individuals will be engaging. It's also reminds me of the concept of the Splinternet too, like the idea that like there'll be regional versions of the, like right now the internet as it exists in China is very different than as it exists in the US, than as it exists in Europe, for example. So like even today, the experience of digital is going to be very different depending on your context. And I think those are actually next level insights. And if you don't play with your head up, I think these technologies will lead to more insularity, tribalism, and like populism. So like that's why the educational mission around this stuff is so fundamental. And it also does tie to the idea of digital inclusion, which I keep coming back to. It's probably one of the topics that I was most happy that we covered. But the idea that like the way everyone engages even with technology or the internet is very different depending on their context. And like community centers and libraries and other coffee shops are actually critical to how we understand digital literacy, digital contexts, digital inclusion. And none of this is built into our K-12 curriculum. Maybe there's a little bit of this emerging in like media studies or ethics departments, or maybe some social sciences, sociology. But like what's interesting is like the more critical academic perspective on this stuff, I think needs to get more air. And I think people need to be having more conversations really about all of this. So I was somewhat inspired, and obviously it's a little bit scary, but like I think it is a place to be thinking about how do you cultivate these literacies in yourself, and then if you are on the learning and education side, like how do you think about sharing that knowledge with folks who may not be as far along the curve as you might be?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question, and I don't necessarily know if I have the answer to it. The thing that, as you're talking, what I'm reflecting on is like we're raising a generation of kids that are going to grow up right with an iPad or an iPhone in their hand, mm-hmm. and they spend an inordinate amount of their time watching videos. And do they even realize that they're being like pushed into a box where they're only going to be fed the same thing over and over again? Right. I think getting this type of education into curriculums at a very young age and more responsible is something that we're going to need to start teaching our kids.
I would even challenge that to an extent of the education of the parents matters too. Like we are at a point where I think there are a lot of parents, myself included, who will say, hey, here's a phone, stop screaming at the restaurant, or hey, here's the iPad, just stop, doing whatever you're doing. And I've made sure to monitor YouTube usage for my 2-year-old. She'll watch some toddler videos, their color videos or whatever it might be. And then 30 minutes later, there's a video on there that's questionable. That clearly is a moment of, wait a second, what's going on? So I completely agree that we need it in K-12. Like we need to start there as well. But I think as a societal problem, we need to be really understanding, educating everyone about how this world is working. And I agree with you a lot, Melissa, on, I've bought into Google. I have an Android. I give them a lot of my data, and I think they provide me more than, we've talked about this previously, more benefit than harm. But I do think privacy is gone, and that I think I'm trying to teach my kids how to play in that space effectively, like to understand what they're putting out there, understand the data they're giving away by watching a certain video or signing in somewhere, whatever it might be. But
yeah, I don't think it's any different than we used to tell when I was younger. I used to be told, don't talk to strangers, do not get whatever you do, that candy in that white van, don't go for it. I mean, it was a hard lesson, but I learned it. I learned it, but it is no different than that, right? Like there is a new education that we have to have as parents. I am not one. I just like to pretend like I am. And then we're going to have to tell our kids, because I don't think I am not, and I will never be on the side of pulling back on technology or highly regulated technology in an effort to protect people, because I think technology and advancements in technology and AI and digital movements are always gonna, the benefits are gonna outweigh the dangers, and we're gonna have to learn as a society to evolve and play in those new spaces.
Yeah, I agree to a certain extent. I also I think in particular the context you're talking about around the notion of like digital natives, and now I hear like AI natives or like whatever version of natives, like sort of a proxy for these kids today and the way they use the new technology. I think it's almost, to me, comes back to the idea of intergenerational diversity too, where like the idea that, you know, older generations understand what it's like to live without the phone as a regular part of their digital context. And like, that's actually something to be celebrated as much as the facility that, you know, quote unquote digital natives have with those same tools. And that the more you're sort of designing for more varied contexts, the better. And the more people are seeking out those differences, you know, like it's the whole inclusion versus exclusionary practice, you know, like how do you encourage almost the opposite of the filter bubble or the echo chamber, like the positive discovery of things that would not be served to me by the algorithm. It almost reminds me of, you know, Google used to have the I feel lucky button that nobody would hit.
Yes, I know. I used to click it all the time.
Okay, so it's some of us, those of us who like variable reinforcement would hit it, but like there is a little bit of that where, like, you know, the other concern is that the algorithms themselves are not, you can't view source on them because like they are just powering the feed, and we don't, even the people within these organizations, another part of that same Ithaka conference I was at had someone who was leading the election research for Facebook. And it was kind of scary because like they're not going to have their findings on the problems with Facebook's you know, data sharing policies and how it impacted the 2016 election until after the 2020 election. And like that's the part that it just kind of blows my mind, where it's like, you know, even the first do no harm idea, like, you know, you've done harm and you have not figured out, you can't kind of, you know, the genie's out of the bottle and you can't figure out how to get it back in. And now another election is coming. So like, I think it's an interesting space. And then the results of the election in the UK also signal that, you know, the echo chamber polarization, tribalism that's powered by platforms, these quote unquote surveillance capitalism platforms, you know, meanwhile, Facebook saying, you know, they're not going to remove political ads, and they're not going to remove political ads that include lies. Like that's some deep stuff, you know? And like, I feel like there are times when rather than immediately go to like a political take or like go to something inflammatory, it's more just pause and be critical about it and be like, damn, like that's complex. Not really sure what we need to do. But like, I think just, you know, embracing a little comfort with complexity, comfort with discomfort is sort of, I think, the new normal. And then the same thing about, we talk a lot about the importance of intentionality, like just know what you're doing, you know, and if you decide, you know, I'm just going to Facebook for a while because I just want to blow off some steam. And I know it's, yeah, there's advertising there, but I'm just doing it. That's your right, you know, go for it. But like, I think at least go in with your eyes open, I think. And then how do you teach people to go in with their eyes open?
I mean, I think that is the last point you said there is the point. My challenge is this, right? Like, I know I don't even go on Facebook anymore. Whereas Google, I'm like, you can have my Google when you have my cold dead body. But Facebook, I'm just not interested. I go on Facebook occasionally to wish someone happy birthday.
Right.
Like that is about the extent I use Facebook right now, because I don't value the information. but I think it's hard, right? Because I do live in my echo chamber, whereas even if I don't read the New York Times or I don't have these videos served up to me, I live in a society where around really, really like strong liberals. Right. And so I live in that echo chamber. And so it's a hard concept for me to say, like, just let's just be more informed, you guys in the Rust Belt over there. Right. And don't fall for the Facebook ads, because the reality is, by the way those algorithms work is, and we're just mad at them right now, is that like, as a liberal, we're just mad at them, is they first searched, or like their cousin first sent them an ad that was misleading or was what they wanted to hear, and they bought into it. So we're just mad at the fact that they're probably more like populists out there than they are liberals.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we're also mad that it's that whole idea that the greatest minds of my generation have been trying to figure out how to get people to click on ads, you know? So like, that is ultimately, that doesn't have to be the foundation of our modern technology ecosystem. Like, it is,
but it is,
and it may be self-reinforcing, self-fulfilling, but like understanding that there are other ways to model how you would design a platform, design a system that is less predatory on the uninformed, is a useful thought exercise.
I agree.
Maybe it can translate into policy. Maybe it can translate into something more. But like, rather than just say, it is what it is. Hey, they won.
No. Fundamentally, here's my one. Fundamentally, and I may be an odd person in this mix. As a bleeding heart liberal, with a very capitalist line, like, I cannot wrong Facebook and Google for wanting to make money, right? So they have hired, because they are willing to pay them really big bucks, someone to work on this problem, right? And to do it, right? Like, instead of getting mad at them for wanting to make money and telling them, no, you're being bad for society, right? I believe if we're being bad for society, society will reject the bad element eventually, and I think you will see that eventually. And so our jobs as people who may disagree with the fundamental principle of what they're pushing is to educate, and I will continue to go back to that. It's to educate, but to educate is not to like be like smacking Facebook on the wrist. It's not going to work. Like, they're a publicly traded company. At the end of the day, if I invest in their stock, or I want to make money, or if I short their stock because I believe they're going to go out of business, which is what I'm doing.
And we've talked a little bit about divestment too. Like, another move, like, movements are there, you know, boycotts is the other, like, opting out of platforms is another place where, you know, you actually do have agency as an individual. But I think a lot of that then becomes more like activism to kind of begin movements to opt out of these platforms, which is tied to the education part as well. I just think like an unchecked, profit-oriented set of platforms that are sort of driving our global economy is setting us up for some disruption, I think, one way or another. It either becomes Orwellian in terms of the sort of the continued sort of dominance of those platforms, or they actually do face some disruption either from the market or from a combination of the market and some regulation. You know, like, one of those things is going to happen.
I agree, but I think as if we the activism is to beat them at their own game. It's to use these platforms for good rather than evil. That will continue to be my position, whether it is possible or not. And to really, it is to understand like what it is, like make sure that the world understands that you are being fed a better lies when you are being fed a better lies.
Right.
And
and it does remind me a little bit of the Business Roundtable sort of pitch, you know, C Corps too, like companies that are actually understanding that there's multiple stakeholders, including the employees they need to attract and retain, the customers they want to get lifetime value from, their suppliers, et cetera. Like, all these people want to engage, all these stakeholders want to engage with an organization that has a position on these things. And I think increasingly those big players are hoping that folks don't scratch the surface too much, because I think, and that maybe that's the bigger point. And who knows, the next 10 years, I'm not sure how they'll actually play forward. but like, you know, some of these technologies, some of these platforms were built 10 years ago or longer, and built on models that sort of were the prevailing thinking at that time. I just think that thinking may be evolving to the point that new and emerging approaches to solving these same problems may ultimately win the day. You know, it's tricky though, because I think these things are so deeply ingrained in our daily life that I think, you know, actually not using Google is really challenging for many of us. So anyway, it's complicated, right? Like
it is complicated.
Yeah.
So
Well,
getting back, go ahead, Dan.
Well, I was going to take it a different way. So to wherever you're going to go, Melissa, go next.
No, I was going to take it a different way too, because I think we've exhausted the fake news aspect of digital literacy.
Well, that's where I was going to turn. So we almost Robert Frosted this, but
Yeah.
we'll go down the same path. The fact here is he lays the groundwork in this presentation specifically around fake news first, and presents the idea of fake news and how there are many ways that it happens, both on social media. Made an example of a tweet from a WhatsApp that someone sort of cropped and photoshopped a tweet and shared it in WhatsApp, and the person refused to find the source material. Like, they refused to go to Twitter and try to actually find whether or not it was true. They just assumed, being there was a screen cap of it, that it existed. Mike, to your point, he talks a lot later on about source code and the idea of being able to click on something and see where it all came from, and the idea of those core literacies and being able to have the ability to piece it all together and have it be more than just, you said binary, it's not black and white, there's multiple layers to this, seems really interesting, and something we probably spend another hour talking about as we get through it all. But of these 8, you know, core literacies underneath, and of the sort of construction he put together in this presentation, what spoke to you the most? Like, what made the most sense to you, and how do we take it forward to be educational, to be a learning topic, to be something we discuss at length in the future?
Yeah, I think we'll probably need to come back to it at a later time, but I think the idea that there's both skill sets and mindsets at a higher level is a nice way of thinking about it too. There's skills, but then there's ways of thinking. The mindsets seem a little more social emotional, you know, so like, you know, are you confident? Are you critical?
Are you civic?
Are you civic? You know, I found them really inspirational. They're confusing because they all begin with C's. So I think in order to be quizzed on this, we would probably want to get our digital literacy flashcards together and make sure we understand them all.
It's like categories. You just start.
Yeah. But I mean, a lot of them, like, you know, civic, creative, critical, confident. I think they do start to outline sort of a nice aspirational notion of how we're engaging with our digital lives and our digital selves. And then he's also got the bigger idea of remixing. So like, try to pull these competencies together in different ways. So like, I guess creative maybe is the one that I'm reacting to the most, in that, like, I think you need to be making things in this new era. And like, even, you know, teaching is that, you know, instructional design is that, writing, you know, music, the arts. I think that's where humanity is going to gravitate towards, creating amazing experiences. And I think in order to do that, you have to understand like all the complexity we just outlined. But yeah, I think there's a lot to chew on, and it's probably a set of themes that I think we'll continue to revisit over the course of the coming years.
Melissa, any initial reaction? I think we will dive in deeper, but any initial reaction to the idea of skill sets, mindsets, about there being a deeper understanding of literacies rather than just digital literacy?
And yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think he hit the nail on the head. I believe is the actual definition, the actual phrase. I do. There's not just one. There is a need to learn more. There's a need to become more familiar, and not just in kindergarten as you raised, but all through your adulthood. I actually think the point he's making, it's not just one. It's not just one literacy that you need to learn. It's a whole handful of suites. I can argue with his 8 C's as a really hard thing to grasp, but I think his points are right, and I think Mike's point, and so I will echo it what he just said there. The mixing of the C's is important, right? And so we've spent a lot of time, partly because it's what I'm always most interested in, talking about how civics and what is our role as arbiters of data and learning and of educating the world is to play. I think those are important points, right? Those are important things for us to get right, and I think we should deep dive into it more, into each of these points more.
And I'll point out this is all available on his website, which is literary, so literaci.es. So it reads as literacies, but the what is that called? The end of .com instead is .es. So literacy is one URL, but .es is stuck in there. Melissa, go ahead.
Yeah, I know you want to wrap. One more point, and I'll bring it back, is the power is important, right? Like the person who controls the power wins this. This is why I asked Mike to explain it at the start, was because like right now the algorithms do control it, and they do control what we see and what we do, and they have all the power to dictate what we do. But that power is something that we have given them as a society, and us educating ourselves is actually what I actually think will take that power back to us, and we get to govern our own lives, is what I always try to remind everyone.
A lot of this discussion predicated off of the work of Dr. Doug Belshaw. Again, it's Literacies with the .es as part of the URL. You can go check out his work. All of his slides are readily available for public consumption and will help this conversation as you listen to it here on Trending in Education. He has other TED Talks from previous stops along the way, and does some Periscopes as well over on Twitter. If you want to check out more of his content, we'll be reaching out, hopefully bring him here onto the podcast in the not too distant future, question him on the 8 C's. But then go deeper, obviously, into all of this discussion points as we roll on. You can find us on Twitter at Trending in Ed. Same on Facebook. LinkedIn, it's linkedin.com/Trending in Education. Want to know what you think about digital literacy and fluency, but even further, these sort of frameworks around digital literacies that we discussed on today's episode. More to come in the future, and hope you enjoyed listening to Trending in Education.